Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic. This one is going to be all about Father Glowworm, so the spirit we learned a lot about in the two Kyoshi novels, a very powerful ancient spirit who is very interesting to talk about. So I'm very excited to get into the discussion here on Glowworm. This topic specifically was chosen by one of my new patrons on Patreon, and that was Albert. This is the topic he chose after coming in at the $5 tier. And of course, when you come in at that tier, you get to choose a topic for me to do a video on in the Avatar discussion series. So he chose Father Glowworm, just a video all about the character, everything about it, his personality, abilities, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to get into that as we go through it here. So I think the first thing to just note here is that this is a character who only appears in the books, meaning there is no sort of canon visual of what this character looks like. So visually, I don't have a ton to show you in this outside of like a brief kind of bit of like very bad fan art that I put together to give you an idea for what Glowworm actually looks like. Again, I'm no artist, but from what I've seen online, there's not even that much fan art of this character. I think I only saw like 3 different fan arts, and only I'd say one of them was like I felt like a good rendition of what the character looks like based off the description in the book. So most of the visuals in this video are going to just be sort of text on slides to sort of accompany what I'm saying, as you've seen before in some of my previous videos. But again, we're discussing a character who only appears in a novel, so that's just how it's going to be. So let's get straight into it here. So first of all, just the name, Father Glowworm, but we later learn he also goes by the World Borer, or It Within the Whole. So the World Borer makes sense because his ability is ultimately to bore holes between the worlds, between the physical world and the spirit world, and create tunnels. So that's a very fitting name for what he does. It Within the Whole, I think, is more of a sense for his approach when it comes to sort of dealing with people, which is to sort of socket himself into some sort of a hole, a position he can sort of like defend his back from, and just kind of look out from there. Other than that, they don't really cover the exact meaning behind that, but it definitely sounds cool to know that he's called like It Within the Whole. So let's first get into his appearance. So the books goes into some detail in terms of describing him, but it doesn't fully connect everything together. So that's why there's some, I think, speculation still about the exact way he should be portrayed. But either way, at his core, Glowworm is a floating eyeball with a web of veins coming off of the back. They describe it as like, you know, it's sort of like pulling the eyeball like tight from behind, and they sort of stem off it and they're pulsating. But basically an eyeball with veins coming off the back, and that makes sense. You can sort of picture that relatively clearly. It's an eyeball. They seem to describe it as being a fairly normal looking eye. It doesn't have lids, so it's just a eyeball with some of the veiny like stuff, you know, I guess optic nerve type stuff coming off the back to give it a bit of a grotesque appearance. But that's only like half of Glowworm's actual like appearance. This core eye, which is Glowworm, controls a large amount of slime which can rot anything in it. Human teeth are floating throughout this slime, highlighting how many humans Glowworm has eaten. This slime is a sickly green color, and his eye gives off a luminescent green color. So again, he's a spirit, and the color with him seems to be a sort of sickly green color. And that's what I've gone for in the video here. As you sort of see, I've gone for a very light lime green that isn't overly kind of energetic, I suppose, as a color, and it definitely comes across that like, okay, he's all about sort of rotting and so on. So I think a color like this definitely fits him. But the thing that isn't made particularly clear is sort of how he controls the slime. The book never really describes that like the eye is within the slime. So I don't think it's correct to describe it as like the eye is floating within the slime, because they do describe it as a floating eyeball just in the mountain when he's first introduced. And then the slime comes out, which they don't describe it that the veins that come off the back of the eyeball control it either, which to me gives the impression that it is some sort of a telepathic connection, that the eyeball just floats like over the slime, and that's basically how the control is. But anyway, here is my basic rendition of the character. Again, I'm not an artist, so that's why it's very, very basic, but I think it gets the idea across. He's just a big floating eyeball that has a kind of green color to it, but there's still going to be some white involved to make it look like an eye. You've got, I suppose, red veins coming off to give it a little bit of color, and just make it look kind of scary as a thing. Just this giant floating eye that looks around, no lids or anything like that. And then its slime is obviously described as being basically the same color, this sickly green color. And then it can control that slime. And this is basically how Glowworm, for the most part, interacts with the world, is through the slime. When it feeds on humans, the humans go into the slime and are sort of, rotted, decayed, dissolved, eaten there. And he does that because within the slime is human teeth and other debris that it's picked up from whatever the slime goes over. And he uses what ends up in the slime after all the rotting occurs to sort of injure whatever he touches with his slime. So that's what you can see here with the sort of tentacles of slime coming out of the ground. And these are, these sort of hands in a way of Glowworm. And it gives you a sense for like how Glowworm works. His core, who Glowworm is the eye. If you want to injure Glowworm, you attack the eye. But can you get to the eye while avoiding what's going on with the slime? That it's good that like his slime is sort of separate than his core, but it also means he has a weakness in that if you can sort of separate him from his slime and remove that connection, he is extremely vulnerable, because it doesn't seem like he really has much power just as an eye, unless he can sort of manipulate you with his words. So he's a very interesting spirit to consider in that way, in that because he sort of in a way is almost like a spirit who has his sort of own form of bending. He bends this unique slime that's unique to him, but it's so powerful and so dangerous that he is a real threat. So I kind of like that idea of just like he's almost like a spirit bender in a way himself, just with his own unique slime. So let me know what your thoughts are on my rendition of Glowworm. Again, the veins, I didn't really know in a sort of 2D way like this what way to portray it, but I think that gets across the idea that it's just these pulsating veins, coming off the back of him. And they roughly describe it in the book that like there are times when the eye does move around a little bit more, and that the slime maybe does connect to them in a way, and he is just an eye with maybe some tentacles coming off it. But again, it's hard to get that because they don't go overly descriptive in the later appearances of him beyond just that he's an eye. So it's hard to fully put it together, but at least in certain situations, this is the dynamic. Just with the usual way he does things is that the eye is sort of socketed somewhere, so that he can control things better from there. So I guess the floating puts him at risk, so instead he just like, puts himself in a mountain cave opening so he can look out and see what's going on, but he can't be attacked from behind. Or in the fight against Yoon, he sockets himself between some trees so that he can, again, look at what's happening before, but he has that sort of like structure around him. And so the weakness of him is that he is sort of an unprotected eye. But when the eye is in a socket, he's more powerful. And they get across that he has a deeper connection with his slime and can control more of it when he is sort of socketed like that. And that's just part of the idea of how his powers work. So that's his appearance. Let's get into his abilities next. So I covered some of how like he functions there, but his core ability is that he can create tunnels between the physical and the spirit world. He makes sure that the physical world exits are in isolated areas, and that he changes his locations regularly, and this allows him to find humans to eat more easily. He has no issues with other spirits using these tunnels, in that he gets his use out of them and he leaves them open. There's nothing explained about the fact that, like, if he can close his own portals, in that it does just seem like he's just able to, make these cracks appear and then open them up a little bit more, and he just leaves them there. It's unclear if he actually even has the ability to close them if he wanted to. But either way, he's fine with doing that, because more chaos for the human world means more humans, I suppose, out of position for him to come in and grab, because that seems to be his sort of goal as a spirit. All he really wants to accomplish is to find humans to eat and sort of use their blood to sort of strengthen himself. They get across this idea that by the more sort of humans he eats, in a way, like, the more powerful he becomes. Which seems to almost imply that, if a spirit gets damaged, that they can restore, like, their life energy by feeding off the energy of, like, humans. I don't know exactly how that works, but that's the way he says it, and that he mentions, like, being strengthened from their blood or something like that, and that everyone knows that he's this, human eater spirit. So that's his core ability. They mention, like, specifically that he, like, rasps away at the boundary between the worlds. So whatever way he functions, I don't know if he does it with the slime or whatever, because when Yun does it, he directly digs with his hands and then eventually breaks through the barrier. But with Glowworm, my guess is that he probably does just do it with the slime, that because his slime sort of rots stuff within it, that he just has his slime sort of rot through the barriers between the worlds and then forces his way through. Because he is just a bunch of slime and an eye, he only has to make the opening big enough for an eye to go through, which is why I suppose, like, weirdly shaped spirits are kind of find it hard to get through his barrier, his tunnels, and need to sort of crack them open some more. But it seems like he is, like, one of the only spirits who does have the core ability to just create cracks in the first place, that isn't just done by insane power, like Korra blocking a spirit beam or Rava and Vatu fighting. He can just, just on his own, just be like, yep, I'm going through here, and just crack it open. And that's very unique, because other spirits seem to have just the ability that, even with the portals closed, to just almost do the sort of meditation into the physical world. Like Wan Shi Tong and stuff like that, Heibai just can go in between. But that's sort of like, doing the sort of, human meditating into the spirit world style. This is actually creating, like, a mini spirit portal. And that makes him, like, extremely powerful, that he can do that at will multiple times. It speaks to just how powerful he is. And in terms of, like, his classification as a spirit, you have to view him as, I think, being one of the most powerful spirits we've ever seen. That maybe he's not Rava Vatu level, maybe not quite Tui La level, but just maybe under that, or maybe actually on the level of Tui and La, because they seem to imply he's more powerful than, like, a Ko and probably, like, a Wan Shi Tong. So he's probably, like, just under the all-powerful spirit tier, which is Rava and Vatu, and that really speaks to his power level, that an avatar in the avatar state can fight like Vatu and win in the avatar state, but an avatar struggled against Glowworm, so you have to view him as being on that level. The other ability he has is probably the more interesting one, in terms of, like, wow, this is an interesting concept. By exchanging names with someone, he effectively curses them, locking them into a contract of sorts. This introduction opens up a victim to be impacted by his powers. In this case, the curse is that a person will suffer misfortune, and anyone they tell about him will also suffer this misfortune. It means no one who encounters Glowworm is ever truly free of him. So this is sort of like a defense mechanism that he almost has, that because he is vulnerable, being just an unprotected eye without the slime, he also has this ability to, when he talks to people, if he introduces himself and they give their name to him, it creates this dynamic where immediately his power is sort of linked to them. They're linked at this point. And so he seems to be able to make bad things happen to them, even if he's not directly sort of doing it. Just they will have sort of bad luck going forward. And if they if they tell anyone else and try to get allies behind them to help against Glowworm, that ally will also suffer misfortune. And they seem to imply that it would result ultimately in, a tragic death, which is basically what ends up happening to Kuruk after the fight with Glowworm, is that the whole Umi incident happens, and it's great that he meets Umi, happy finally for him, but then it goes wrong because of Ko. But the fact that happened is almost, influenced by Glowworm. And again, they don't go into great detail about the exact specifics of this, but it just seems to be that somehow Glowworm does also have this other ability to just, almost rot away at someone's life and just make bad things happen to them. And it's another way for him to sort of defend himself, but with his words, that he literally, they describe that there's like a power in the idea of an introduction with a spirit, especially a spirit who has a self-appointed name. It's not just that humans call Father Glowworm. That's his name. He considers that to be his name, and so there's a power to it. So that's quite interesting. It almost speaks to the idea of, like, the way with Ko the face stealer. He can steal your face, but only if you show like heavy emotion around him. That's almost like his curse. That, like, if you exchange names with him, and then the thing that properly like activates that contract to where his abilities can affect you is by showing emotion. I think it's meant to be like that level of kind of thing, of that spirits are super powerful, but there is an inherent block that, like, not all of their abilities can immediately work unless the human in some way opens them up to accepting the spirit and their power to some degree. And that's just kind of really interesting to consider. But yeah, there's two main abilities, and then, like I said, like his ability to sort of manipulate his slime, which is ultimately just another aspect of his body, but it doesn't seem like you damage Glowworm by damaging the slime. So I think that is just something that he can control. But again, it's interesting that, like, he seems to gain power by absorbing people into the slime. So there's some sort of an energy-based connection between him and his slime. So that's kind of interesting. Next, we'll get into battle tactics. So Glowworm's approach is to socket his eye in a strong, defensible position and sit back, letting his slime do the fighting for him. It means that his core is vulnerable, but if the core is protected, it allows his slime to dominate the battlefield, since he has so much of it to use and can control the slime as he wishes. The amount of slime he can control is determined by his size and power. This suggests that back when he fought Kuruk, when he was at the heights of his power, he could control an incredible amount of this slime, enough that he could face Kuruk in the Avatar state and fight him to a draw. And I think this is probably the thing that's really hard to picture in your head the most, in that the fight with Yoon versus Glowworm makes sense to a degree, because they describe that Glowworm at that point, his eye is the size of a wagon wheel. And so it's like, okay, it's within range. Like, it's still a relative, it's a big eye, but like it's a small thing relatively. So, but you have to consider that in the past, the eye was like 5 times bigger than it is now. So when Kuruk fought Glowworm was like this huge eye. And if Glowworm can control an amount of slime to basically control the battlefield against Yoon, imagine the amount he could use against Kuruk. Again, he has to be able to basically put up, I suppose, slime defenses enough to block against Avatar state attacks, which speaks to just like he's controlling like a river, like an ocean of this slime. And that speaks to like how Glowworm, with seemingly relatively like low ability to put out damage, can wound Kuruk in such a way. Because again, the slime seems to have the ability to sort of rot stuff almost immediately, and use the teeth within it to immediately start like eating away at whatever it touches. So it's just this case of like, if Kuruk touches any of this, he's going to take an injury. And if he really allows like his arm to get like properly hit with the slime, his arm could be like unusable afterwards, which I think is why Yoon talks about it and in his fight against Glowworm in that way of like he's almost sacrificing parts of himself, that for him to do damage to Glowworm, he has to commit to his attacks enough that he's putting like his arm at risk or something like that. And I think that's what they're trying to get across here, that, you know, tactically, Glowworm knows that his core is vulnerable, his eye is vulnerable because it's an unprotected eye. So he has to, in the fight against Yoon, like keep himself back. He sockets it in trees or in a forest and kind of moves from tree to tree. He always has to sort of keep himself sort of like rooted or grounded in some way to control all of the slime, which I think speaks to the idea of like just floating normally he can control a certain amount of the slime, but if he wants to do really important stuff with it, he has to be sort of like he has to stay in place and channel his energy through the slime in the same way that like a bender typically has to, you know, almost root themselves in place to channel up a really big attack. So there's that sort of comparison between how his own control of slime works with bending. But it is a unique dynamic of like, you know, he creates the battlefield just by himself of like, you can injure Glowworm very easily, you know what to attack, but can you get close enough to the eye to actually deliver a blow? Because once you're there, you know exactly what you're targeting and he doesn't have much of a close defense. But how do you get through all of that slime considering how much of it there is? So it speaks to, you know, Yoon's power, Kuruk's power, that they were able to do damage to Glowworm and get through all of the slime. The slime can be used as an appendage or as a weapon. Since the slime has teeth and other debris in it, he can cause serious injury by grabbing someone with it. The slime is how he takes blood and eats humans. And again, he is exceptionally vulnerable if you sever his connection to his slime, as Yoon did. So the way Yoon ended up defeating Glowworm, I'll go into this in a little bit more depth later on, but specifically with this connection is that they basically came up with the deal that I will pass through you and give you some of my powers to basically get through into the physical world. In exchange, you will basically bring humans to me to eat. And so Glowworm socketed himself in a tree to channel his power to get ready to do this spirit morphing on Yoon. And right as he was about to do that, Yoon just big earthbending attack completely took away the whole top layer of earth, including the roots of this tree. So immediately the tree that Glowworm was attached to suddenly isn't rooted into the ground anymore. And what seemed to happen is that while he was doing this, the slime was just on the ground. So as Yoon got rid of all the ground, the slime just sort of went away, along with the connection that Glowworm had into the ground also. So temporarily, Glowworm was not able to use his slime, and this allowed Yoon to like grab the much smaller now Glowworm in his earth of ice and just crush him down to size where he could eventually eat him. And again, that speaks to that idea of like, if you can really sort of, you know, get a large amount of the slime and like do something to it where like it sort of moves to a position where you can't maybe see it or something like that, you can take an advantage over him. But, you know, it's a really interesting concept to kind of think about how that exactly works, of like you're basically just fighting against effectively an eye controlling like a river of sentient slime that if it even touches you is going to start eating away at you with all these teeth and stuff that's inside it. So you can't get hit with this at all. That like if you got covered in this completely, like you'd be like ripped to shreds is the impression I get. So yeah, that's a very interesting one to consider, of just like the size of Glowworm in the past and what that would suggest about how much slime he was able to use. Because other than that, it does not seem like he has any other abilities. So let's move on to his personality. So in many ways, he seems to be your typical arrogant spirit who looks down on humans and only really sees them as prey for him to hunt and eat. So the fact that he eats humans is probably one of like the most unique things about him, because typically it is not at all something we associate with spirits. That, okay, angry spirits sort of destroying parts of the physical world, potentially killing humans, but killing them with the idea of you want to eat them is pretty unique. But beyond that, he does for the most part not think too highly of humans, and has that sort of arrogance of the spirits where he just thinks that, like, I am a better form of being than you. He's a little bit more interesting than that, because as we see, when it really gets down into, I suppose, slightly more desperate times, he's willing to talk, he's willing to negotiate, form deals with humans, but that does only seem to be once he realizes that that human could be a threat to him. I think the fight with Kuruk probably had made him realize that humans can be dangerous, and especially after Kuruk, damages him so much to where Glowworm is nowhere near as powerful as he once was, he is suddenly at risk to powerful benders, not just the Avatar. So it's stuff like that that's important to sort of keep in mind. And you see that he has an element of caution to him in just how he approaches things. The fact that he always sockets himself in an area and is very defensive for the most part during his battles speaks to that, but also that he has to be that way. He is a hunter of humans. That's why he does things the way he does. He, makes a portal between worlds, comes in, grabs a human, eats them, and leaves, and lets another spirit come in and try and get through that portal and cause more chaos. And so no one really ever knows he was there, because he hides these portals in, like, the middle of mountains and stuff like that. And that's his approach. Like, that's the whole kind of dynamic between Kuruk and Glowworm. They're both hunters, just sort of different styles of hunters, basically. And so, yeah, this highlights, him sort of developing a begrudging respect for the ability of strong human benders, especially after what Kuruk did to him. His ability to form a contract or curse someone also seems like an ability to protect himself from being outnumbered. By cursing anyone who learns his name, he keeps himself safe from large groups, because especially post Kuruk, he would be vulnerable to even just like 2-3 benders who discover him, in terms of who's to have a fight with them. Maybe if they're just average benders, he might be able to deal with them comfortably, but anyone who's reasonably skilled, he's at risk, so he has to be cautious in some ways. We see that he dislikes humans coming to talk to him, and he hates that Ko is the one who basically led humans to think that this is something normal, that, you can go up to talk to a spirit. He doesn't like that at all, but he does seem to have developed skills in negotiating with humans, though it only seems like he does this when there are humans who are a threat to him, like Jeonju and then later Yoon after they have their fight. So with Jeonju, it's pretty clear. Like, I think everyone rates him very, very highly as an earthbender, and I think just from reputation, Glowworm must realize that Jeonju probably is someone who could cause Glowworm some trouble, and he doesn't want to fight him necessarily. So there's a sense that they've met before, and he's more willing to talk to Jeonju. And that's why he more retreats after, the whole Avatar reveal comes out. Jeonju seals up his cave. Like, they both sort of don't really want to fight each other, but Glowworm does ultimately retreat in that situation, which I do find quite interesting. He takes Yoon and leaves straight away. But the thing with Yoon is, and I think this gets across why he overall doesn't think too highly of humans, is that when Yoon is sort of scared when he is first in the spirit world and first encounters Glowworm, it's obviously him at a very low point, just after the betrayal by Jeonju, finding out he's not the Avatar. Glowworm is like, you're nothing. Like, you're just like an impurity. Like, you will just be another one of the humans that I'm here to eat and consume. He thinks nothing of him. But after they have their fight, and they're sort of at an impasse that, like, if they go any further, it's going to go down the exact same path of Kuruk versus Glowworm, where they're probably going to fight each other to some sort of a draw and badly injure each other once again. So he makes the decision that's not going to happen again, and instead decides to negotiate with Yoon, because I think he knows Yoon could actually defeat him. So he takes the approach of, like, okay, he's not going to be a particularly easy meal for me. So why don't I create a deal? He needs to get back to the physical world. I'll give him some of my power so he can have that ability to get through. And in exchange, you bring humans to me and I get my meal, basically. That's what he wants from Yoon. Yoon obviously agrees to it initially, but then he sort of betrays Glowworm, and this is where he defeats him and then eats him. He turns the tables completely on Glowworm. Glowworm was planning to eat Yoon and consume him initially, but Yoon does the exact same thing to him. So, very, very interesting overall there. He does only seem to deal with humans if it can lead to him getting more humans to eat, as shown with both the deal with Jeonju, where he takes Yoon, and the offer to Yoon, where he wants Yoon to bring humans to him. So that seems to be, in general, his approach of just, now that he's sort of weaker, and he is encountering humans who are quite strong, there's a sense of like they are on more equal terms, so he has to have some sort of a ability to talk and negotiate with them. The only other thing I'd add to that is just that there is some sense of like, he at least considers himself to have some sense of honor when it comes to these deals. And he's like, when Yoon kind of betrays, goes against the deal, he's like, Kuruk would have never done something like this. And he seems to think that Jeonju sort of like went against their deal as well when he tried to, you know, obviously protect Kyoshi, but handed Yoon straight over. But I think that's more of a sense of like just Glowworm's arrogance, thinking that like he controls the nature of every single deal, because he got his blood, but he took Yoon fully. I don't think it was ever part of the deal that he would get both of them, but he thinks just by saying I'm raising the price that he can take both of them. And so I think that's just the dynamic that he has going on. But yeah, overall, an interesting enough, dynamic for a spirit here with the whole wanting to eat humans, but then having to sort of almost negotiate with them at times because of the position he's in. So this is just sort of a recap of some of the stuff. We see that Glowworm, of course, fights Avatar Kuruk, and their fight is so intense that it nearly creates a new spirit portal. They are evenly matched, and their fight ends when they both grievously injure each other. They will both never be the same again. This fight also links Glowworm to the spirit of the Avatar. He will always be able to tell who the Avatar is regardless of appearance. So they sort of hit each other so hard that like a bit of their spirit is sort of like intertwined with each other. And this is like part of the dynamic of the book, that Yoon is able to always know where Kyoshi is, and then eventually Kyoshi is always able to know where Yoon is because he has consumed Glowworm. They're just inherently linked from that point on. Glowworm specifically shrinks in size multiple times over after Kuruk's attack. This is what happens when a spirit takes damage. Since their form is not fully physical, their form shrinks in size as they take damage. Because like the idea of like a spirit like losing an arm doesn't really mean anything, because they are just sort of energy basically to a degree, so it makes more sense that the sort of amount of energy would go down rather than their form necessarily showing a particular wear or tear. So their just core size is what shows sort of their level. So Kuruk's strike against Glowworm forever diminishes Glowworm's power to the point where years later Yoon is able to defeat him, which is this situation here. Glowworm is defeated by Yoon and shrinks down to a size where he fits in Yoon's hand. Yoon then eats Glowworm, which gives him Glowworm's ability to tunnel between worlds, in addition to a big power boost. This turns Yoon into one of the most powerful benders we have ever seen, only defeated by Kyoshi when she creates an opening by finally apologizing to Yoon for taking his avatar hood from him. She uses this opportunity to kill him by instantly freezing his organs. We know spirits are never truly destroyed, so whether Glowworm was properly destroyed when Yoon ate him, or later when Yoon was killed, Glowworm should be reborn in a new form at some point. So he could appear in future stories, just with a new appearance and potentially a new personality, depending on what exact approach they want to take with that. Rava, of course, was reborn and for the most part seemed the same, except for the loss of the past lives. So my guess is that Glowworm probably would come back with much the same power level and the same want for revenge against the Avatar. But Not sure about the specifics in terms of like how long that might take or anything like that. He might now be a bit more cautious about interfering with the human world and just stick to himself. But it is an interesting one to consider of like, when Yoon ate him, was that Glowworm being destroyed then, or was Glowworm only properly destroyed when Yoon was killed? Because it's basically getting across the idea of like Yoon's power boost that he has for like most of the Shadow of Kyoshi. Is it because sort of the power of Glowworm is still alive within him, and so only when Yoon is killed is Glowworm properly destroyed? Or does he basically kill Glowworm by eating him, but the energy is still within him, but Glowworm died at that exact moment? That's a little bit harder to tell. So that's why I say, like, you know, regardless of which way it is, Glowworm should be reborn, because as far as we're aware, the only way to truly destroy a spirit would be to dark spirit bend them. And even then, we don't know the exact specifics on that. So Glowworm should be reborn based on the rule that spirits can never truly be destroyed. They only die and then change form and are like reborn again. So that's kind of interesting to consider. And then the final few points is just this. Kuruk is not the first avatar that Glowworm has encountered. Kuruk's own journal states that he has tangled with many of the avatar's past lives. And I don't think that is just referring to the fact that sort of Glowworm's actions sort of influenced what Yang Chen had to deal with, which then set up the Kuruk stuff. It definitely implies that Glowworm as an ancient spirit has dealt with many avatars in the past. There probably just was a relatively big gap between the sort of Yang Chen Kuruk and then the previous avatar that he dealt with. And then also, he is a truly ancient spirit. He calls Ko an upstart, which implies that Glowworm has been around much longer than Ko, who himself is described as being one of the few spirits old enough to remember Tui and La passing over to the physical world, an event described as being near the beginning. So if Ko remembers that, that implies that Glowworm's been around even longer than that. So Glowworm is one of the first spirits, you almost would have to say, a truly ancient spirit. And it speaks to, again, the power level that he has, having such a unique ability as to tear between the worlds. This was a very dangerous and powerful spirit we dealt with here. Like, this is not just some like random spirit that we dealt with here that's kind of fun to know about. We really did meet one of the most notable spirits in the franchise over the course of these two books. So, like, you know, that's quite interesting to consider. Just that. But yeah, that's pretty much everything we know about Glowworm. Doing this video was kind of interesting to just go really in depth on some of this stuff, like his battle tactics, really trying to analyze his appearance and the way it works, especially, you know, like trying to analyze, oh, like the slime has to be his main mode of offense, so how is that powerful enough to take on an avatar? And that's kind of interesting to consider also. But yeah, even stuff like the fact that, you know, this character could come back. That would be a really interesting thing if we ever heard about him again being used in the story. So yeah, I definitely would like to see a little bit more fan art of this character, just so we have a better sense for, like, yes, that is the fans', you know, proper interpretation of what he looks like. My version of him, I think, gets the idea across, even if it's in no way a particularly good piece of art. But yeah, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Father Glowworm. And then finally, last thing I'll just say here is that once again, this was a Patreon chosen topic by Albert. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future Avatar discussion video, you can do so by joining my Patreon at the $5 tier. And at that tier, you get access to my Patreon exclusive videos, as well as the option to pick a topic for one of these videos. So that's the way Albert did it here, and other people have done in the past. That is your way to get the topic that you want in one of these videos. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.